My name is Chad Blacklock. I'm the Director of Business and Finance for the Franklin Township Community School Corporation. The presentation you're about to view is designed to give you more information about public school finance, property tax caps, and the 2011 operating referendum for the Franklin Township Community Schools. Let's begin by talking about school finance. Public schools have to use a type of accounting system that's called fund accounting. This is a type of accounting system in which we place a greater emphasis on how money is spent rather than how it is earned, like in a private entity. Revenue and expenditures must be segregated into categories or funds, each having a distinct purpose. We must also follow all State Board of Account rules and regulations. The State Board of Accounts is a governmental entity that oversees the accounting practices of other governmental entities using the fund accounting system. State Board of Accounts comes in and audits governmental entities every 2 years. This slide shows you the main operating funds and the other funds used within a school corporation. The main operating funds make up the bulk of a school corporation's total budget. They also go through the formal and legal budget process each year. The general fund, being the largest of the funds, is supported by the state revenue. The other funds, debt service, pension bond, capital projects, transportation, bus replacement, are all funded through property tax levy. We then have other funds. These other funds still have to follow State Board of Account guidelines. However, they do not go through the formal budget process each year. Now let's take a look at how public schools are funded from the state level. The state of Indiana budgets funds each year for K-12 education. These funds go to all public and charter schools based on their ADM or average daily membership. A school corporation's ADM is essentially their enrollment, with kindergartners counted as half. The reason we count kindergartners as half is because at current time the state only funds kindergartner for a half the amount that a regular ADM would be funded. The amount of state funding a school receives is calculated using a 12-page formula prescribed by the legislators during their General Assembly session. The legislators have the ability to adjust the formula every 2 years on the odd number years. They can put grants in, take grants out, or adjust the complexity factors or multipliers within the formula. At current time, state funding formula is not equitable among school corporations. This means that all school corporations receive different amounts of ADM funding each year. This slide shows you the total 2011 state budget. As you can clearly see, 53% of the total state budget in 2011 was allocated to K-12 education. Medicaid being 13%, higher ed 12%, and all of our other governmental entities. Now let's take a look at state funding specifically for Franklin Township schools. In 2009, after running the formula, Franklin Township schools received $5,189 per ADM. There was no reduction in 2009. 2010-2011, there was a reduction handed down from the state level. The formula in 2010 should have given Franklin Township schools $5,208. However, after the reduction, we lost nearly $269 per student to net $4,939 per student. In 2011, we are operating at another reduction of $290 per student, for a net per ADM funding of $4,866. If we were to multiply that per ADM funding times our ADM, we get the total amount of funding that we're receiving from the state. This money is received in monthly installments in the form of a check from the state of Indiana. So you can receive, in 2009, we did receive $43.1 million in general fund revenue from the state of Indiana. 2010, that dropped to $42.2 million, and in 2011, another drop to $41.5 million. If you recall in a previous slide, I mentioned that the state funding is not equitable among school corporations. This slide is designed to show you some of those inequities. There are 349 school corporations in 2010 that received this per ADM state funding. Franklin Township Schools ranked 291 out of 349 for the funding. Prairie Township Schools was the highest funded public school, receiving $12,340 per ADM. Dewey Township's schools received $9,866. Then we have some other schools that are closer to home: IPS, Speedway, Wayne Township, Perry Township, and then Franklin Township Schools at 291 receiving the $5,208. Carmel Clay Schools was one of the lowest funded public schools in 2010, receiving $4,818 per ADM. The second column shows you the amount of revenue that Franklin Township schools would receive in additional revenue if we were to receive that school corporation's per ADM funding. So for example, if Franklin Township schools received Wayne Township's per ADM funding, we would receive an additional $8.5 million into our general fund. If you recall, I mentioned that each one of our funds has a distinct purpose as far as revenue and expenditures. This shows you our general fund and the revenue and expenditures that go into and out of this fund. 85% of the revenue into the general fund comes to us in the form of that state funding or that monthly tuition support. We then get 15% of miscellaneous revenue in the form of grants. And up until 2009, school corporations had the ability to levy property taxes in the general fund. The general fund, just like it's titled, is the one fund that school corporations can pretty much pay for anything. However, Franklin Township schools, like most school corporations, the bulk of their general fund expenditures goes to salaries and benefits. 90% of Franklin Township schools' expenditures out of the general fund goes directly to salaries and benefits. The other 10% then goes to utilities, supplies, insurance, and really any other need that we have to operate a school. The second largest form of revenue to school corporations is in the form of property tax revenue. So public schools have the ability to levy property taxes for its tax-supported funds only. Back before property tax caps, schools would typically collect 95 to 100% of its advertised property tax levy. There are also three other types of levy that go into the property tax-supported funds, being license excise tax, commercial vehicle excise tax, and financial institution tax. This slide shows you the 5 property tax supported funds, and you can clearly see the 4 types of revenue into these funds, with 80% of that revenue being in the form of property tax levy. If we then focus on the column titled Expenditures, this shows you that distinct purpose that each one of these funds was designed for. The debt service fund is the fund that we essentially pay our mortgage payments on all of our buildings that have been newly constructed or renovated over the last 10 to 15 years. We pay those debt payments in the months of June and December, twice a year. The pension bond fund is another fund in which we pay one debt payment out of, again in June and December. The capital projects fund, we are allowed to use that fund to pay our technology staff salaries and benefits. We can also pay a portion of our utilities, property and casualty insurance, and essentially any improvements or maintenance that would need to be done to our facilities we can pay out of the capital projects fund. We can also repair equipment or buy technology. The transportation fund, like it's titled, is designed to operate a school corporation's transportation department. We can pay for bus drivers' salaries and benefits. We can buy gas, oil, and tires for our school buses, pay for our bus insurance, and any necessary repairs or maintenance that would need to be done on a school bus. We can also pay a portion of the utilities for our transportation barn. The school bus replacement fund, like it is titled, is used to purchase a school bus. None of these funds can you pay a teacher or an administrator's salary. They have that distinct purpose, which is listed in the expenditures column. In the notes column, the one bullet point I would like for you to pay attention to is the one that says state statute. Schools must pay their debt before all other obligations. There is a state law that says schools must pay debt before any other obligation. So if we have only enough revenue coming into our property tax supported funds to pay our debt and not enough revenue to fund capital projects or transportation, we have to pay the debt payments first. Let's talk a little bit about property taxes. If you think about your property tax bill, you start out with your gross assessed value. Your gross assessed value is similar to the appraised value on your home. It's that dollar value assigned to your property before any deductions. We then reduce that gross assessed value by any deductions you may have. You might have a homestead deduction, a supplemental homestead deduction, or a mortgage deduction. There are several other deductions you may be entitled to if you meet the specific criteria. These deductions, after subtracted, bring us down to our net assessed value. We then apply our property tax rate to the net assessed value, which will net the property tax levy. We now have something called property tax caps. What the property tax caps do is set a ceiling or limit to the total property tax liability that a property owner would pay of their piece of property. So let's look further at property tax caps. In the state of Indiana, there are three categories that all property falls into as far as property tax caps. The first category being residential homestead, second category being other residential, farm ground, or long-term care facilities, and then all other essentially being most businesses. 2009, we somewhat baby-stepped into the property tax caps, with each one of these properties being capped at the 1.5%, 2.5%, or 3.5% of their gross assessed value. 2010 was our first year for full implementation of the property tax caps, the 1%, the 2%, and the 3% of the gross assessed value. Franklin Township Schools is being greatly affected by the property tax caps because of the fact that most of our assessed value falls into the 1% tax cap category. 85 to 90% of the properties in Franklin Township are capped at 1%. We do not have a diverse mix of other assessed value that would fall into the 2% and 3% category that would help to reduce the amount of the effect of the property tax cap. This slide shows you a comparison of a property tax bill before tax caps and after tax caps, or with the new method. So we're using an example of a home that's capped at 1% and it has a gross assessed value of $100,000. They have the standard homestead deduction of $45,000. They now have the supplemental homestead deduction of $19,250, and they have a mortgage, so we're instituting the mortgage deduction of $3,000. These bring us to our net assessed value. We then apply the same tax rate to both scenarios of $3.75 to get our tax liability. The tax liability is calculated by taking the net assessed value, dividing that by 100, and multiplying it by the tax rate. We then used to have something called a SPTRC, or Supplemental Property Tax Replacement Credit. That was a credit that came right off the tax liability. In this situation, it was $400 for this homeowner. That brings this total property tax bill down to $1,550 before property tax caps. Now, after tax caps, this person should pay $1,228. But if we take a look at, again, this property is $100,000 gross assessed value. It's capped at 1%. They will never pay more than $1,000 in property taxes. So we simply have to deduct the $228, and this person would pay no more than $1,000 in property taxes. That negative $228 is the amount of money that the governmental entities within Franklin Township are losing to the property tax caps. This slide again lists the 5 property tax supported funds and the 2010 certified levy for the Franklin Township Schools in each fund. We needed $22.5 million in the debt service fund to make our debt payments. We needed $638,000 in pension bond to make that bond payment. To pay our technology people and to operate our facilities, we needed $5.2 million. Transportation needed $3.8 million. And bus replacement needed $921,000. We needed a total levy in 2010 of $33.2 million. However, once we got in our final tax collection, we only received $24.6 million. We had a loss of almost $8.6 million, or 25.8% of our certified levy, due to the property tax caps. This slide shows you across the state, on an average, how the different governmental entities are being affected by the property tax caps, or amount of money being lost in levy. We show county government, township government, cities and towns, schools, libraries, and any other taxing unit. It's clear to see from this chart that cities and towns and schools are losing the most amount of money to the property tax caps. The reason for that being that in most communities, cities and towns and schools have the highest tax rate. So therefore, they are losing the largest percentage of levy to the cap. This slide shows you a comparison of Marion County schools and their loss of revenue to the tax caps. You can see Franklin Township Schools came in second, losing nearly $8.6 million, or 25.8% of the certified levy. Beech Grove topped this list, losing 36.1%, or $3.3 million of their levy. So where are we now? Over the last several years, Franklin Township Schools has experienced rapid student growth, being the 4th fastest growing school corporation just a few years ago. With these rapid student growth, there also came multiple construction and renovation projects of the facilities. To fund these projects, municipal bonds had to be issued. There used to be a process in place when school corporations wanted to issue municipal bonds called the petition remonstrance process that actually involved the school corporation getting signatures from people, community members, that were in support of issuing the bonds. There was also an opportunity for community members that were against the issuance of the bonds to get signatures on their petitions as well. These petitions were then taken to the auditor's office and each signature was signed. If there were more signatures in favor of the bonds issuance, then the project moved forward. If there were more signatures that were against the issuance of the bonds, then the project stopped at that point. Because we had new or newly renovated buildings, we had little maintenance going on within our facilities, which meant we had very low capital projects expenditures. We also had increasing tuition support revenue due to our student growth, and up until 2009, schools had the ability to levy property taxes within the general fund. And we did not have property tax caps, so school corporations were typically collecting 95 to 100% of its approved tax levy. Over the last 2 to 3 years, Franklin Township Schools has made an attempt to reduce expenditures within the general fund, the capital projects fund, and the transportation fund. This slide outlines many of the expenditures that have been implemented, totaling almost $5.3 million. So where are Franklin Township Schools today? In 2010-2011 school year, Franklin Township Schools actually reduced 22 ADM. We went from growing 100, 200, 300 students per year to actually losing 22. Our facilities are starting to see a little bit of maintenance that are needing to be done, and we are out of warranty in some of these facilities and needing just some updated technology and just that maintenance that goes along with having 500 to maybe 2,500 kids in a school building. Our state funding is being decreased because our ADM is dropping and we're seeing reductions at the state level. We can no longer institute property taxes for the general fund, and the general fund is 100% controlled by the state. As far as property tax caps goes, we are now only collecting 70 to 80% of our advertised tax levy. And we actually have some increasing debt payments over the next 2 years. So at this point, where are Franklin Township Schools going? The Franklin Township School Board has voted yes on a plan to reduce expenditures if the referendum were to fail on May 3rd. This plan is not a pretty plan. It's not a plan that was made in the best interest of students, but it was a business plan, a business reduction plan that we have to implement to balance our budget. This plan does involve eliminating all transportation activities, reducing our capital projects or our maintenance functions, eliminating music, art, and PE from the elementary levels, and eliminating nearly 81 teacher positions from the elementaries, the middle schools, and the high schools. We would also be eliminating our benefits for our Category A non-certified employees. This is a total reduction plan of nearly $10.9 million. Let's talk a little bit more about the operating referendum. When is it? The operating referendum vote will be on May 3rd. A yes vote from the community will allow Franklin Township Schools to keep transportation, maintain music, art, and PE in the elementary levels, and keep our other staffing as it is. It will also allow us to continue to maintain our facilities properly out of the Capital Projects Fund. It is a 7-year referendum. State statute says that school corporations can institute an operating referendum anywhere between 1 year and 7 years. It cannot exceed the 7 years. Franklin Township Schools would need it for the full 7 years. We are also asking the community to vote yes on a maximum tax rate of 75 cents. This is a maximum rate. We do have the ability to lower the rate, but we cannot raise the rate past 75 cents. This slide shows you the actual question that you will see when you go into the voting booth on May 3rd. Again, the question is actually dictated by state law as well. We implemented 3 things into the question. You can see the 7 calendar years, you can see our name, and the 75-cent tax rate. On the school corporation's website, you can find a tax estimator or calculator. This is a screenshot from that calculator based on a $150,000 gross assessed value home. The two pieces of information you would need for this calculator are the gross assessed value on your piece of property and if you know your taxing district code. The taxing district code is not as important as a gross assessed value, but some of the different districts, the 4 districts within Franklin Township, do vary slightly. You can get these two pieces of information off of your current tax bill or even your last year's tax bill. The current tax bill would have the most current information, obviously. So again, we're looking at a gross assessed valued home at $150,000. It is important to note that the tax rate or the referendum rate is figured on your net assessed value after deductions. However, the calculator uses the $150,000 starting point or the gross assessed value starting point to then have your deductions to get to your net assessed value. So again, you're going to put into the calculator your gross assessed value. You can see that on this specific example, 2006, this property owner paid $2,887 in taxes. In 2007, they paid $2,828. 2008, they paid $2,049. 2009, they paid $2,250. And in 2010, when the property tax caps were finally implemented, they paid their cap of $1,500. If Franklin Township Schools were to implement the full 75-cent referendum rate, they would pay an additional $489 per year, as you can see by the graph. This would make for a total tax bill of $1,989. I think it's important to note that this is still less than the person paid in 06, 07, 08, or 2009. I would urge you to visit the school corporation's website or the DLGF, Department of Local Government Finance website, their calculator as well, to get an idea of what the referendum rate would cost you on your particular piece of property. In 2011, Franklin Township Schools state funding was reduced by nearly $2.5 million. We ranked 291 out of 349 for state per pupil funding. At present time, the state is not restoring school funding to its original levels. Franklin Township Schools must pay its debt payments before all other expenditures. In 2010, we lost nearly $8.6 million in property tax revenue due to the property tax caps, and we are only generating enough property tax revenue at this time to make our debt payments. In 2010, we ranked second among Marion County schools in loss of revenue to the property tax caps, and to date we have made nearly $5.3 million in expenditure reductions.